So today we're going to start with critical reasoning. Okay. And so, in the exam, out of 23 questions in verbal, you're going to get anywhere around 10 questions from this. Okay. Roughly 10 questions. Now, give and take 1 or 2 questions here and there. Okay. This is what we're going to have. So very, very important topic. Second, you'll find this to be the most time consuming topic. Most time consuming per question. Okay. So, and this is one topic where it's pure logic. Okay. And we need to try to understand the way GMAT uses logic. Okay, the way GMAT understands logic, that's how we need to understand it. Okay, that's the primary point. And there are 7-8 subtopics here: assumption kind of questions, evaluate. We'll discuss each and every one in detail. Strengthen, weaken, finding flaw, boldface, paradox, complete the argument, inference, or conclusion. So these are the subtopics. These are the things that we need to discuss in under CR. In today's session, we'll take up these two things, these two topics. Okay, assumption and evaluate. And again, we'll discuss each and every topic in detail. We'll discuss in detail what exactly we need to do, what are the basic stuff that we need to take care of while reading any CR question. First and foremost, when you see any CR question, so there'll be like 2 to 5 lines. Okay, there'll be an argument. It's like a small paragraph of 2 to 5 lines. Okay, and based on that, the question will be asked. For example, in assumption, the question would be, what assumption is required to make the argument? Okay. What assumption is required to make the argument? So the 5 answer options would be the assumptions, and one of them would be the correct assumption that is required for the argument. Again, we'll discuss each and everything in detail. Don't worry. I'm just giving a glimpse of what the question would be like. Okay. So first, we need to understand what is the argument. Argument is nothing but the paragraph given to us. The 2 to 5 lines we're talking about, that's what we're calling the argument. Okay. See, when you make an argument, what do? You use some information, you use some reasoning to arrive at some conclusion. This whole thing is called argument. Okay. 2 people are discussing something, one person is making an argument. So that argument simply means this is the information, this is the basic premise. And based on this reasoning, we are making this conclusion. This entire thing is called argument. Okay. So if the question asks, the argument requires what assumption? So we are talking about the entire argument, the whole thing. The whole thing is argument. Okay, the whole paragraph is your argument. Okay, that's the first thing. And if there is one underlying thing that we all need to understand, which is understand the conclusion. What is the ultimate conclusion of the argument? Okay, this is there for every CR question. Okay, doesn't matter which subtopic we are talking about. Ultimately, what is the final conclusion? That is something that we have to be very clear about. Okay, if we make sure this thing, I mean, make sure this thing means if we understand the conclusion correctly, more than half of your mistakes would be gone. Okay, more than half of your mistakes would be taken care of if you do just this one thing. Okay, if you just stick to what is the final conclusion. So when you read the argument, when you read the paragraph, what you need to do is, what is the information being used? What information is given to me? Okay. Second, what is the reasoning being made to arrive at a certain conclusion? That's how you need to understand the argument in these three parts. Okay. For example, let's say, uh, uh, let's take a sample conclusion, sample argument. It says, new norms require airlines to have more leg space. Okay. New norms require airlines to have more leg space. As a result, the number of seats in every airplane will decrease. Consequently, revenue per flight will go down. Go down will decrease. Okay. So it's these are like three lines. This is the entire argument. Okay. First of all, what is the information given? Information is this thing. New norms require airlines to have more leg space. Okay. So information means some kind of a fact, or something that that is our starting point to argue. Okay. And we cannot go against that information. Go against the information means we just have to take it as a fact. Okay. Because if we don't consider the fact, then there is no point making the argument further. Okay. First thing, whatever information is given, just take it as the truth. Okay. So this is our information part. Okay. Something has happened. New norms have been put in place for airlines, which require them to have more leg space in the between the seats, row of the seats. Okay. That's the information part. What is the conclusion? Eventual conclusion is revenue per flight will go down. Okay. This is the final conclusion we are talking about. Okay. Everybody with me on this? This is the final conclusion of the argument. Okay. This is what I want to say eventually, that revenue per flight will go down. And I'm using this information and this reasoning. Okay. I'm using this information and this reasoning to make this conclusion. So the reasoning is number of seats may go down. This is the reasoning being used. Okay. Sometimes information and reasoning can be one single thing. That's totally fine. That's not a problem. Okay. Again, what we are concerned with is what is the final conclusion and how do we arrive? How does the author arrive at that conclusion? Okay. So in our mind, we need to understand, or I mean, what is the basis of the conclusion or the claim made by the author. That's all. That's how we want to understand the paragraph. Is that clear with everyone? Any doubts? Any questions till now? Okay. So this conclusion that we are talking about, you should write that conclusion. Okay, write it on the paper. Okay. Because the reason is, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you get the conclusion correct, more than half of your mistakes will be vanished immediately. And, why am I asking you to write it on the paper? Two things, you will be doing it on the exam day as well. So whatever you will be doing on exam day, you better practice it while you're doing questions. That's one thing. Second, you can have very complex options. Answer options can be complex, can be very tricky, difficult to understand. So you don't want your mind to be divided in two ways, one on the option and one on the conclusion. So it's like when you will be reading the answer option, you will be trying to match it with the conclusion, match it as in the sense that whether it's hitting the conclusion, whether it is targeting the conclusion or not. Okay, again, we'll take enough examples to understand that. Don't worry about that. The point here being, it's very difficult to keep two complex things in mind. We want our mind to be focused on one thing at a time. That's why we just want to write the conclusion so that we don't have to keep it in our mind. Okay, write it, because trust me, if you don't write it and you have complex options, you'll always mess up with the options in the conclusion. Okay, we want to avoid that fact. So instead of going through 50 questions and then realizing it, that this is the problem, you do it from the first questions. Okay, trust me, eventually you will realize that. Okay, that it's very difficult to keep both the options and the conclusion in our mind and be focused on both the things. It'll be very difficult. Okay, and you will make some mistakes because of that. So better write it. Okay, that's one thing. Second, so this is there with every CR question, every critical reasoning questions. You'll be trying to understand the argument. Okay, how is the author arriving at what conclusion? Okay, this is how we need to understand. Now let's come to assumption, the topic that we'll be starting with. Okay, question will be, what assumption is required? To make the conclusion. Okay, this is the question prompt. So what is an assumption? Let's see. So you'll have a reasoning, some reasoning or logic based on which you are making a conclusion. Okay, that's how we understand the argument. How is the author arriving at that conclusion? How simply means what is the reasoning behind making that conclusion? Assumption would be the link between reasoning and conclusion. Okay, assumption is acting as a link between reasoning and conclusion. Without the assumption, without that correct assumption, the conclusion may be different. Okay, without that assumption, conclusion may be different. Okay. For example, let's say GMAT format has changed. Okay, so we cannot use the books for older version to practice the appropriate type of questions. Okay, let's say this is the argument. GMAT format has changed. So we all know we are dealing with Focus Edition right now. The older version has been retired. So GMAT format has changed. So we cannot use the books for the older version to practice the right set of questions. Okay. What is the assumption required here? See, the information is about the format. Format can be about number of questions, number of sections, those kind of things, the scoring pattern, those kind of things. But the assumption required is the type of questions has also changed. The nature of questions has also changed. This is the inherent assumption required to make this conclusion. Everybody agrees with me on this? The information is about format getting changed. Format could be number of questions. It could be, the types of, let's say, number of sections that we deal with. It could be timing of the exam. It could be scoring of the exam. But when we say older books cannot be used for to practice appropriate type of questions, the right type of questions, we are assuming that the type of questions has also changed, has also been changed. Okay. Without this assumption, we cannot make this conclusion. I mean, the conclusion could be different. Okay. Is that okay? Everybody understood? Okay. So if the type of questions doesn't change, as is the case right now, you can still use the older books to practice the right kind of questions. So the correct kind of questions don't change. CR questions in older books also would be same, of the same format. RC also would be of the same format. It will not be of any problem. Okay, so this is the assumption required to, I mean, the the ultimate test would be whether an option is correct or not. You negate the assumption. Negate the assumption. Negate the assumption means this option says type of questions has also been changed. Negate means type of questions has not been changed. With that negation, okay, I mean, if we include this information in the argument before making the claim, the conclusion could be different. For example, if you say GMAT format has been changed, but the type of questions has not been changed. Okay, so we can still use the older books to practice questions. Okay, the conclusion can be changed if we negate the assumption. That's the whole point. That's the ultimate test of picking the correct option. Okay. If by negating that particular option, the conclusion can be changed, that means that is the correct option. Okay. And incorrect options, even if you negate the assumptions, it will not have any impact on the conclusion. Okay. So negating the assumption must impact the conclusion. It's like reversing the assumption option, the correct option must impact the conclusion. Is that clear, everyone? Any doubts, any questions with this particular example? Okay, let's get going with some questions and we'll understand this much more better. Just go to the sheet. Try first question. Give it a try. Okay. Read the argument carefully and do write the conclusion. That is the first thing you must be doing. Okay. Make it a habit. Okay. Make it a habit right from day one, right from question number one. Write the conclusion. Okay. See, it might sound funny, but don't trust your mind to capture that conclusion correctly throughout all the options. Don't trust your mind. It's like that. We are writing it because we are suspicious that our mind might not hold that information correctly throughout. That's assumption. Again, that's assumption required here. Okay. So write that conclusion. Don't burden your mind with too much of information. That's the whole point. Okay. Give it a try. First question. Okay, let's see the question. And we'll go a little slow initially because we want to get a hang of the format, CR format. Okay. So timing again would be improved gradually. It cannot happen on day one. Okay. On day, I mean, in the beginning, just try to get the logic correct. Try to practice getting the conclusion correct. That is something you must be practicing initially. If the airspace around centrally located airports were restricted to commercial airliners and only those private planes equipped with radar, most of the private plane traffic would be forced to use outlying airfields. Okay, so we are restricting the centrally located airport to only the commercial planes and private planes with radar. So that means private planes without radar will be forced to fly on, outlying airfields. Okay, so most of the private plane traffic would be forced to use outlying airfields. Such a reduction in the amount of private plane traffic would reduce the risk of mid-air collision around centrally located airports. So ultimately, the idea is there'll be lesser private plane traffic around the centrally located airports. And as a result of it, the ultimate conclusion would be that there will be less risk of collision. So this is your ultimate argument. Okay, the risk of conclusion would be lesser. Okay, and the reasoning is that there will be lesser private plane traffic around the centrally located airports, airfields. Okay, everybody understood? Everybody with me on this, understanding the reasoning and the conclusion? We are using this reasoning to arrive at this conclusion. That's what we're doing. Okay. So the conclusion drawn in the first sentence. Now it's very important to read the question prompt. Okay. We're talking about conclusion drawn in the first sentence. What is the conclusion drawn in the first sentence? Anyone? We have first sentence till here, and then this is the second sentence. So in the first sentence, what claim or conclusion is being made?
That most of the private plane traffic will be diverted to the outlying airfields.
Yes. Yeah. Most of the private plane traffic would be forced to use outlying airfields. Okay. So if this is the condition, then this will happen. This will happen means this is the final conclusion we are making. Okay. So it's like we will not allow, so only the private planes with radar will be allowed on the around centrally located airports. And because of that, most of the private planes will not be allowed to use centrally located airports. Okay, that's the conclusion we are talking about. So what assumption has been made? What assumption is required to make this conclusion? Let's see. Outlying airfields would be as convenient as centrally located airports for most pilots of private planes. Are we talking about convenience? Whether, which airports are convenient or which are not? It's not about convenience. We are talking about if the rules do not permit. Okay. If they're not allowed, if the rules are made in such a way that some of the private planes without radar are not allowed out there. So it's not about convenience. Okay. This is, I would say irrelevant option. Okay. So in CR questions, we need to pick which options are relevant and which are irrelevant. That is the first thing. Okay. While looking at the options, first thing that should come to your mind is whether this option is relevant or not. This option talks about convenience as a factor. We are not talking about convenience anywhere in the argument. That's why this option is irrelevant. Okay. So that was, and our first option is out. Most outlying airfields are not equipped to handle commercial airline traffic. Again, are we making any claim about commercial traffic? No, we are talking about private plane traffic. Private plane traffic would be forced to use outlying airfields. We are not talking about whether commercial airline traffic is allowed on outlying airfields or not. This is also irrelevant. Okay, the conclusion is explicitly about whether private planes would be allowed out there or not. Okay, so we are not even mentioning commercial airline traffic in that conclusion. So that's why this is out. Most private planes that use centrally located airports are not equipped with radar. Okay. See, when we said that if we don't allow private planes without radar, okay, private planes without radar, if they are not allowed around the centrally located airfields, most of the private planes will not be allowed to operate out there. So we are assuming that most of the private planes are without radar. That's the assumption. Okay, because if they have a radar, they will be allowed. So if most of the planes will not be allowed, that means most of them do not meet the condition. That means most of them do not have a radar. So that definitely is the assumption. I mean, if we negate it, negate as in most of the planes, most of the private planes have a radar, are equipped with radar. So that means most of them would be allowed to operate. And the conclusion that most private planes would be forced to go out, no, that conclusion would be wrong in that case. We cannot make that conclusion. Okay, everybody understood? We'll deal with the other two options as well, but is that option understood? That definitely is an assumption that can be our answer. So any doubt with this option, let me know. Saurav, you mentioned E. How did you eliminate C?
Sir, I missed the question that it was written in the first sentence. Depends.
Acha. Okay. Okay. So that's very important. We have to, this is against a small mistake that, many times can happen. Read the question carefully, the question prompt. Okay. But Saurav, is that fine now? This can be our correct option, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's see D. Commercial airliners are at a greater risk of becoming involved in mid-air collisions than our private planes. Okay. Again, the conclusion is most of the private planes would not be allowed on the centrally located airports. This again is irrelevant to that discussion. Okay, whether commercials have a bigger risk of collisions or the private ones. This is irrelevant. Simply we are dealing with whether private planes, most of the private planes would be forced to move out. A reduction in the risk of mid-air collision would eventually lead to increases in commercial. This option talks about what happens after the argument, after the conclusion. Okay, after the ultimate conclusion, after the final conclusion of the argument, that it will have a lesser risk of mid-air collision, and a lesser risk of mid-air collision would eventually lead to what? So this is like extraneous. This is also irrelevant because we're not dealing with what will happen if the conclusion is correct. This is option E outrightly says what will happen if the conclusion is correct. This is not what we are dealing with. Okay, we are dealing with what assumption is required for this conclusion, and which is option number C. Any doubt whatsoever here? Let me know. Again, all the things that I was mentioning earlier, whatever conclusion we are dealing with, if we are very clear on that conclusion, the other four options were totally irrelevant. Okay. So with easier questions, easy to mid difficulty level, this is what will happen. If you know your conclusion correctly, at least three options would be out immediately. Okay, immediately as in they are not relevant to the conclusion we are talking about. Okay, they'll not impact. I mean, whatever happened, whether those options are true or not, it will have zero impact on the conclusion. We simply remove those options. Understood, everyone? Any doubts? Any questions? Okay, let's do now second, third, fourth, and fifth. 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, try to implement the things that we have discussed, which is understand the conclusion, write the conclusion, and pick options, not pick, but eliminate options which are totally irrelevant to the discussion, which will have no impact on the conclusion. Pick or eliminate those options first. And if you're left with two options end of the day, then you'll have to do negation after that. This negation thing would be required only if the difficulty level goes up, trust me. In the first instance, you will be able to eliminate at least 3 options with easy to medium difficulty level questions. Okay. In all the questions I'll be taking today, 3 options definitely will be able to remove easily. Last 2 options, if we are confused, this negation is your ultimate test, the final test. Okay. Well, the reason why I'm saying we will not be using it with every question, we'll be using it only if it is required, because this is a time consuming thing, little time consuming thing. Okay. So this should be needed only as a last resort. Okay. Try these questions 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's go to the questions. Second, bank depositors in US are all financially protected against bank failure because the government insures all individuals' bank deposits. Okay. An economist argues that this insurance is partly responsible for the high rates of bank failures since it removes from depositors any financial incentive to find out whether the bank that holds their money is secure against failure. So there is no incentive to find out whether banks are secure against failure or not. There's no incentive to figure that out. Okay. If depositors were more selective, then the banks would need to be secure in order to compete for depositors' money. Okay. So if there is any incentive to check security of the banks, banks would like to be more secure. Okay. So there is no incentive to find out whether the banks are secure or not. So if there were incentives, I mean, if the depositors were choosy, they were more selective, then the banks would also try to be more secure to compete for the money. That's the argument. Okay. So the economist argument starts from here. The economist argues so and so. This is the entire argument by the economist. Which of the following assumption is required? Okay, so the economist argument requires or makes which of the following assumptions? Let's see. Bank failures are caused when big borrowers default on loan repayments. Okay. So the cause of default is that they are not secure against failure. Okay? There is no incentive for them to be secure. It's not about whether big borrowers default or not. This is irrelevant to the argument. Okay, irrelevant, or this is extraneous to the argument. This is not part of the argument. Okay, this is not one of the factors of the argument. That's why this is out. Did anybody pick A option? Anyone? No. Good. So this is the first thing. Whether big borrowers are causing bank default, bank failures or not, that's not the question. Second, a significant proportion of depositors maintain accounts at several different banks. So whether they maintain accounts at different banks or only one account, one bank, that really doesn't make any difference. This is also irrelevant. Question is, if there were incentive for them to figure out whether the bank is secure or not, would that make any difference or not? Okay. Again, any incentive to figure out which bank is secure, whether that incentive will be effective or not. That's the argument. It doesn't touch upon that. The more a depositor has to deposit, the more careful he or she tends to be in selecting a bank. So this one is not about security of the bank. This one is about amount of deposit. That's why this is also irrelevant, because this is a different factor to figure out whether the banks are secure or not. So it has to do with the amount of deposit, not any incentive to figure out, not any other incentive to figure out. Okay. So anybody who picked C option for this? Okay, no. Okay. See, when you are dealing with the options, it's okay if you keep the option for later purpose. Okay, keep as in, we are in this option, we are still talking about whether the depositor need to be more careful or not. So you can keep this option for further evaluation. Okay, if I were in place of you, I would have kept this option, because this does talk about whether the depositor is careful or not, whether he or she needs to be careful or not. Okay, so let's keep this option for a moment, right? The difference in the interest rates paid to depositors. This talks about a totally different factor, interest rates offered. Okay. This doesn't talk about whether the depositor needs to be more careful to find out whether the bank is secure or not. That is out. Okay. Third, potential depositors are able to determine which banks are secure against failure. Okay. So what it talks about is whether the depositors can or cannot determine which banks are secure. So this option also talk about whether the banks are secure or not. Let's keep this option. Okay. Now we have kept two options, option C and D. So first of all, any doubt till this point in eliminating A, B, and D? Now we'll evaluate between C and D. So any doubt with the remaining three options, let me know. Okay. Now let's see. Option C says more a depositor has to deposit, the more careful he or she tends to be. That means if he has less amount to deposit, a small amount to deposit, he or she will not be careful. Okay. But the argument doesn't say whether the amount will decide whether they are secure or not. That's why this option is out. Okay. So if they have more to deposit, they'll be more careful. If they have less to deposit, they'll be less careful or not careful at all. That is not the part of the argument. That's not what, the author is not distinguishing between amount to be deposited, whether it's small or big. Option E says potential depositors are able to determine. Okay. Now the argument was if the depositors have any, if depositors were selective about which banks are secure. If the depositors were selective about which banks are secure, then there will be incentive for banks to be more secure. Okay. Now, if the inherent assumption is that people are able to determine which banks are secure. Okay. So right now they are not selective, they are not choosy in determining which banks are secure. If they were more selective, that means they are able to determine which banks are secure or not. Because if we negate it, that means depositors are not able to determine which banks are secure. So if the depositors are not able to determine whether the banks are secure or not, there's no question for depositors to be selective. Okay, then this argument, this claim doesn't even arise. Okay, whether they were selective or not. If they're not able to determine, see, if I'm not able to do something, there is no question whether I'm not doing it, on my own. Okay, whether I choose not to do it or choose to do it, because I am not able to do it, so I can't do it. So this whole argument falls out. Okay, so that's why this is the correct option. This is the inherent assumption required to make this argument for sure. Is that clear, everyone? I think everyone picked E for this. Yeah. So that's the reasoning behind it. That's why this is the assumption. Okay. Any doubt whatsoever here? Let me know.
Sir, what should be the ultimate conclusion of this argument?
Ultimate conclusion eventually is this insurance is partly responsible for high rates of bank failure. Since, when we say since is the reasoning. Why that conclusion is made is explained after since. So the reasoning is explained after making the conclusion. Right?
Yes, sir. Understood. Yeah.
See, this confusion can be there initially, whether the conclusion would be at the end. See, there can be two kinds of structures. This is the reasoning, and based on this, we are making this conclusion, as was the case in first question. Okay, so because private planes without radar will not be able to fly. That's why most of the private planes would be out. Okay, so reasoning is mentioned, and then we are saying the conclusion. But it can also be the other way around. This is the conclusion. Since this will happen, since this is the reasoning. So when you have this word since means we are telling the reasoning after this word since. Understood, Mansi? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. But the thing is, like, suppose we are having E as an answer, and if I
Mhm.
negate the statement E, I don't think it is going to impact our
No, it can
conclusion, right?
impact the reasoning based on which we are arriving at the conclusion.
Okay. So it's
Okay.
like an indirection. Okay.
Definitely. So the correct option has to either impact the reasoning or the conclusion directly. Either way around.
Understood. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Because the reasoning is the basis on which we are making a conclusion. So if the reasoning is targeted or reasoning is kind of, I would say, impacted, the conclusion definitely would be impacted. Right?
Understood. Yeah. Thank you.
Sir, and in this question, we are looking for the assumption that could link between the reasoning and the conclusion.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, sir.
Assumption is always something which is linking the reasoning with the conclusion. Always. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So it might impact the reasoning itself, because if that is the assumption and that is the truth, that means we cannot use this reasoning to jump to the conclusion. Okay. It's like we are jumping from reasoning to the conclusion. But if we negate that assumption, negate as in if we reverse that assumption, that link, then we cannot jump from this conclusion to reasoning, this reasoning to conclusion. Okay. So we need, I mean, negating the assumption simply means, can it create a block between reasoning and the conclusion? That's it. Okay. All right. Question number 3, a good question. And let's try to find a pattern in this question. Okay. Pattern as in this kind of logic can be used in many, many questions. Okay. This type of logic I'm saying. The content can be different, but the logic can be used in multiple, a large number of questions, I would say. The company's personal director surveyed employees about their satisfaction with the company system for awarding employee performance ratings. Okay, so this is the information. Some survey was conducted. The survey data indicated that employees who received high ratings were very satisfied. So employees who received high ratings were satisfied. Okay, this is again the survey report, survey results. Okay, whatever results are given, we cannot counter that. Okay, so this is part of the information. Okay, so this information is given to me. The personal director concluded. So when we say concluded, that means this is the conclusion. So he or she concluded from these data that the company's best performing employees liked the system. Okay, so the best performing employees liked the system. Okay. Now, the pattern that I'm talking about here is, let's talk about that. Okay. And I'll be talking in abstract terms without getting into details. Details blur our vision. It's like that. We need to remove the details and see the structure of the argument. The information given is high performing, the people who got high ratings are satisfied. X, people in X category are satisfied with the system. Okay. But the conclusion made is of best performing employees, which is a different, which can be or may not be a different category. It's like people in category Y are, they like the system. That's the argument made. Okay. Information is people in X category are satisfied with the system. So people in Y category must be liking the system. That's the argument, right? We need to be careful. People who received high ratings were satisfied, and we are making a conclusion about best performing employees. In such a case, the simple assumption is always X and Y are same. That's it. Because we are talking about X, the information is about X, and we are saying Y does the same thing. Inherent assumption is X and Y are same set of people. That's assumption. So that's the pattern I'm talking about. Information is about one set of people. Conclusion is about a seemingly different set of people, maybe. Assumption actually is these are not different, these are same, which is option B, if you see. Once you start finding this pattern, let's say in whatever question this pattern is used, it'll be very easy for you to pick the right option. We'll deal with all other options, but can you all see this pattern out here? The one that we just discussed. A lot of you picked B option, C option. Shweta, Saurav, Mansi. We'll deal with option C, okay, when we reach option C. But do you recognize the pattern out here right now? Do you think option B should be the right answer here compared to C as of now? We'll deal with option C.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Shweta, make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let's deal with the other options. Okay. Again, as we discussed in RC, we'll be dealing with each and every option, and we'll also try to see why an option is wrong if we are eliminating it. Okay. When we eliminate an option, we must have a very solid reason, solid logic to eliminate it. See, the reason to pick an option should be as strong as a reason to eliminate an option. It should be equally sound logic. Okay. Let's see. No other performance rating system is as good as the current system. We are dealing with one system. We are not comparing it with other system. There is no comparison being made. Okay. It's not about the comparison. Whether it is best or not, that's not the thing. Okay. We are talking about one system. Some people are happy, so they must be liking the system. That's the argument. Whether they like other system better or not, that's not the question. So option A is out. Employees who received low ratings were dissatisfied with the system. Okay. Now, see, we made the conclusion about people, the information is about people receiving high ratings are satisfied with the system. Okay. Now, this option talks about the remaining category, the opposite category, which is people with low ratings are not satisfied with the system. Okay. But the final conclusion is about a different set of category of people who are best performing. Still, this connection is not there in this option. This is simply reiterating what is already written out there. People who received high ratings are satisfied. That means the other set of people who received low ratings are not satisfied. We already know this thing, kind of. This is already an implicit information. We already know this thing. Question is, how do we link the conclusion with this? The linking of the conclusion is only happening in option B. Okay. So all those who picked C as an option, does that make sense? Why option C cannot be our answer? Option C is actually reiterating what is already written out there. Assumption has to be some new information, as simple as that. If the information is already there, that means that information has already been used to make the conclusion. It cannot be the assumption required. Assumption is something which is not there as an information. Understood? Mansi, Shweta, Saurav, why option C is not correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we need to see, this is a very tricky option. This can be a very, it's a trap option, I would say. Okay. So we'll learn eventually how to read or how to, understand those trap options, how to figure out that it's a trap option. Okay. This is simply written out there implicitly, indirectly. Something which is already written out there cannot be our answer. Simply. I mean, in case of assumption, it has to be something new. Okay, new kind of information. Again, and we have already seen with the pattern, we have to link two categories of people that they are same. Actually, these are not two different categories, which is not happening in C. C is silent on people who are best performing. That's it. It's talking about high ratings and low ratings. It doesn't talk about which set of people are high performing or not, best performing or not. That's out. The employees who receive high ratings from a performance rating system will like the system. We already know that people who received high ratings are liking the system. But what about people who are best performing? It's silent on that. Again, it doesn't make the required connection. Okay. Company's best performing employees. Now, this option talks about best performing employees. Okay. They were motivated to perform well by the knowledge. Again, it is simply talking about best performing were motivated to perform well by the knowledge that they were received. But it doesn't tell me whether these are the people actually who received high ratings or not. They were motivated to perform, but they actually performed or not, or whether they got the high ratings or not, we don't know that. B straight away tells me that these are the same set of people. E still leaves us in some confusion that these might not be same set of people. That's why option B is the answer. Any doubt whatsoever with this question, let me know. Okay. Let's see fourth. Okay, fourth also is a great question in the sense we'll also recognize one set of pattern out there. Tourists have long complained that hotel accommodations in Mid-Valley are too expensive. Okay. Starting last year, City Council, hoping to attract more tourists, lowered the hotel tax rate to 5% of the room charges. Okay. So earlier the tax was higher than 5%. Right now it was reduced to 5%. Okay. Reduced to 5% means earlier it was more than 5%. By the end of last year, Midville had taken in no less money from hotel taxes than it did the year before. Okay. So we have reduced the tax percentage, but the tax collection did not go down. Didn't decrease. Okay. So see, while we are reducing the tax rate, the tax collection can go down. There's a chance. Okay. So an examination of the hotel records will show that more tourists stayed in city hotels last year than the year before. Okay. Now, before we go to the options, let's try to understand one thing. We reduced the tax rate. Okay. But the tax collection remains, let's say, at least the same as it was earlier. What could be the reason of tax collection to remain same? What could be the reasons? What could cause this?
The tourists increased.
Okay. We had
Room charges
more
are high,
tourists. This
like
could be one
before
reason.
tax.
Alok, you were saying something?
Room charges price were high
Maybe prices were
before
high.
taxes,
Prices were hiked.
where we are applying the
For
tax.
example, earlier it was, let's say, 10% tax. So let's say if room charges were 100 rupees, tax would be 10 rupees out of it. Okay. Now the tax reduction is 5%. When tax is 5%, it has been reduced. Let's say the room charges are 200 now. So this 5% of 200 still remains 10. So maybe we had same number of people, only one person visited and only one person visited here. Just because the room rates were increased, the tax amount might remain same. So the one reason could be again more tourists. Okay, if we double the number of tourists, so tax amount will remain same. Otherwise, another reason could be prices were hiked, and that's why the tax collection remains same. This could be another reason. Okay. So again, the information is tax collection did not go down. It was not lower. So if there are, multiple reasons for a phenomena, multiple reasons for for something to happen, and the conclusion is that one reason is the possible cause. Right? Again, the reasons could be, let's say, two reasons. Either there were more tourists or the prices were hiked. The author is making the conclusion that the reason for same tax collections were that there were more tourists. Okay. So we are picking reason A to be the cause. Okay. So again, the inherent assumption in this is that reason 2 is not getting into effect. Reason 2 is not happening. Because if reason 2 is happening, if prices were hiked, we may not have more number of tourists. Okay, without increasing the number of tourists, we can still have same tax collection if the charges for hotel rooms were increased. Everybody getting this kind of reasoning, cause and effect? Shweta, you picked D, but did you understand why C can be a possible reason?
Yes.
Mansi, you picked A. I mean, we'll come to A, but getting this reasoning that I'm explaining.
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is again a pattern. Okay. The question will say that the possible reason is, or the possible cause is cause A. So inherently, the author is assuming that the other cause is not coming into play. That's it. Okay. Because if the other cause is coming into play, the first cause might not be the actual cause. It might not be happening. Okay. So that's why option C is the right answer. Let's see other options. The tourists who stayed in Midwell Hotel last year were aware that the hotel tax rate had been lowered. Okay. So who picked option A? This is also a trap option. Mansi, you picked option A.
Yes.
See, the conclusion is that more tourists stayed. But here we are talking about same tourists who stayed last year. This doesn't tell me where would the new tourists come from.
Understood.
Getting a point? Still, we are talking
Yes,
about
sir.
same set of people who stayed there. So
Okay.
by, at best, it can say that all those people came back, but where did the new people come from? It doesn't tell me about that. Okay. Second, average price of hotel accommodations in Midville was not significantly higher than in hotels in other cities either last year. We are comparing it to other cities. Okay. So, and again, it talks about both the years, last year as well as the year before. So there is no difference between what was the case last year and what was the case year before. So how would there be more tourists this year? It doesn't create any difference. When the question says, or the conclusion says that there could be more tourists this year, it has to give me a reason. Okay. So it doesn't distinguish between what happened last year and what happened the year before. So it cannot be a reason. Okay. Anybody who picked option B? No, nobody picked. Okay.
Yes, sir, I picked it, but I don't.
Utkarsh, come again.
Yeah, I actually picked that B
But
option, but
understood
didn't
now?
notice that, yeah, that in other cities and last year.
It's talking about other cities. So last year also was the same case. This year also was the same case. So what caused the higher number of people?
Yeah.
Understood. It has to have a difference, na? I mean, something different happened last year than what happened the year before. Then only we can say that something new, something more happened this year or last year. Okay.
Yes.
And again, that is the secondary part. First part is we are not comparing it with other cities, what is happening in other cities. That's totally out of context. It has nothing to do because we are saying the cause is, I mean, this less tax collection happened because of more tourists. I don't know what is happening in other cities. That doesn't really matter. Like it's not a factor anywhere mentioned in the argument. C, we already seen. D, there was significantly more efforts to publicize Midville as a tourist destination last year than there had been the year before. Okay. Now, this is also a trap option in the sense this tells me that there were more efforts to publicize Midville as a tourist destination in the year in which we are talking about more tourists. Okay. But more efforts doesn't mean that only this thing is happening. It might or might not happen. Okay. Again, we are not talking about what is causing more tourists. We're not trying to find a reason of what is causing more tourists. What we are trying to find is tax collections remaining same. What is the cause of that? Understood? That's why option D is not relevant in this discussion. Okay, who picked D? Shweta, you picked D. Understood? We are not trying to find a cause of what is causing more tourists.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we are trying to see if that is the cause of some other thing. I mean, same tax collections or not. So that's also out. On average, tourists in Midville did not spend significantly more on meals last year. Again, we are talking about tax collection from hotel accommodation, not from meals. Totally irrelevant. Okay. We're talking about taxes on room charges. We're not talking about taxes on meals or not. I mean, whether they were increased or decreased. We're talking about taxes on room charges remained same. So whether they spent more on meals or not really doesn't matter. Understood, everyone? Any doubts here? Let me know. So this is also a pattern. The author is saying cause A is the real cause. The assumption is some other cause B, is not into play. That's the point.
Yeah, why can't we have both partial effects of both the causes?
We can have both the things coming into play. We can have, but again, the assumption is this is not the cause. That's why we are saying. Otherwise, the conclusion should have been that both the reasons are doing the thing.
Okay.
Okay, so it simply says only cause A is the reason. That's what it says.
Mm-hmm.
Understood?
Yeah, got it.
Let's see fifth. What answers we have for fifth? B, D, D. Okay, B and D. Let's see. Generally, scientists enter their field with the goal of doing important new research and accept as their colleagues those with similar motivation. Okay. So they enter the field to do important new research, and they accept colleagues with similar motivation. Okay. Therefore, when any scientist wins renown as an expounder of science to general audiences, most other scientists conclude that this popularizer should no longer be regarded as true colleague. Okay. So they accept people with similar motivation. Okay. Similar motivation means motivation to do new research, important new research, as their colleagues. So, it's like, people who are motivated to do X, they are accepted as colleague. Okay. So, people who are trying to do Y are not accepted. Okay. It's a similar kind of a pattern. Okay, people who have similar motivation means motivation to do important new research, they are accepted as colleague. People who are renowned as expounder of science to general studies are no longer accepted as colleagues. Again, we are simply saying X and Y. I mean, Y must be totally against X. People who do X are accepted as colleague. People who did Y are not accepted as colleague. So Y should be totally opposite of what is X. That must be the assumption, right? So if you do option D, if you see, people scientists who believe that those who are well known as popularizers of science, I mean, people who are in Y category are not in X category. These are totally opposite. Can you see that same pattern out here? Alok, Shweta, can you see? I mean, you mark B. I mean, we'll come to B again. But can you see why D is exactly what we need?
But sir, scientist, scientist who does important research can also be.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that. I mean, see, question is people who are trying to do X. X means important scientific research. They are accepted as colleagues. Okay. And it says therefore. Therefore means it's linking these two things. Right? This is very important. Therefore, people who are trying to do Y are not accepted. Right? That's an argument, out and out.
Sir, I got confused by the prompt of the question. It is asking lowest team in which scientific popularized.
And lowest team, I
question-
mean, they are not seen as, true colleague. Na? They are seen as low. Not accepted as colleagues means They're seen, in low esteem. They're not regarded good people.
Yeah, that's why I mark B. I see
Okay.
as a regard. The low
Okay,
esteem.
but understood now.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right. Any other confusion with this, Shweta? Is the confusion over? I mean, is your question answered or not?
Not satisfied.
Okay, but we'll come to option B again. But does this make sense? Whatever we are saying in option D, at least as a reasoning.
No, but my confusion is not resolved that why scientists, like those who do research, cannot be popular like that.
No, cannot be. No. We are not trying to find reason for that. What we are trying to see is the author says people who are trying to do X are accepted as colleagues, right? Therefore, people who are trying to do Y are not accepted as colleagues. That is the argument out and out, first of all.
Yes.
Yes. So we are making a distinction that X and Y are totally opposite things, right?
Yes.
Because we have to limit ourselves to what is discussed in the argument. We can't think anything, outside that, right? People who are doing X are good colleagues or accepted as colleagues. People who are doing Y are not accepted, and we are putting a therefore. And therefore, people who are trying to do Y are not accepted as colleagues. That means X and Y must be totally opposite. I mean, whosoever are in Y are not in X.
Okay, got it.
Got it now? Okay.
Yes,
And
yes.
we'll go through option B. So it'll be much more clear after that. Let's see. Serious scientific research is not a solitary activity, but relies on active cooperation among. I mean, this is like a general gyan, but that's not our concern. What we're concerned is X and Y. How do we link them, or how do we create a distinction between them? It's not capturing that. Research scientists tend not to regard as colleagues those scientists who renown they envy. Research scientists tend not to regard as colleagues those scientists whose renown they envy. It's like already written out there. Okay. And it talks about all those scientists who are renowned. We're not talking about scientists who are renowned in general. We're talking about scientists who are renowned as an expounder of science. People who are trying to do serious research, they might also be renowned. Okay, but we are concerned with people who are renowned as this kind of people, this kind of scientists. They are not accepted as colleagues. Is that clear? And when we say envy is a very subjective word. Whether they are regarded as colleague or not, that's a different thing. You might envy your colleague. You might have someone as a true colleague, but you might envy him or her. That's totally fine. So it's not kind of connected. It's irrelevant to the discussion in that sense. Okay, two things. It's talking about all those people who are renowned in general, but the argument talks about people who are renowned as this kind of people, expounder of science to general audience. So that's why we can remove this option. Does that make sense now, everyone? All those who picked B. Right? Any doubt? Any questions out here with this?
no, understood.
Understood. Okay. Shweta, now it's much more clear now why option B is wrong.
Yes, yes.
Okay. C, a scientist can become a famous popularizer without having any completed any important research. That's, can become a famous popularizer without having. It's not about whether a person can become famous popularizer without doing any research or not, but we are trying to prove they are anti each other. I mean, Y is anti X. Okay, it still leaves some room for both of them to be happening together as well. Okay, people who are trying to be Y can do it without doing X. That is fine. But actually, what we want to see is these are two opposite kind of people. That's what we want to see. If we compare option C and D straight away says that people who are doing Y are seen opposite of X. Okay, that's why D is a better option in that regard. Anybody who picked C for fifth? Okay. Okay. Any doubt with C? Let me know. No important new research can be accessible or accurately assessed by those who are not themselves, totally irrelevant. We're talking about non-scientists, totally out of context. Okay. D is the correct option because of, again, it's a similar reasoning. We have seen this reasoning earlier as well. People in category X are regarded as true colleagues. Therefore, people in category Y are not regarded as colleagues. That means people in Y cannot be X. They cannot be in X. That's the thing. Okay. And option C talks about completing new research. Nowhere we are talking about completing the research. It's about being motivated to do similar research. Okay. They might complete it, they might not complete it. It's being motivated to do that research, not completing or not completing that research. That's why also option C is, another angle why option C is wrong. All right. Let's see. Sixth, very good question. Eighth, again, very good question. And ninth. Sixth, eighth, and ninth. Let's do one more. 6, 8. 1 second. 6, 8, 9, and 11. 6, 8, 9, 11. Give them a try. Okay, again, trying to find a pattern wherever you can. I'm not saying you can find a similar pattern in all the questions, but try to find it wherever you can. 6, 8, 9, 11. Yep. Okay, let's see these questions quickly. Educational theorist. Recent editorials have called for limits on the amount of homework assigned to children. Okay. So editorials we are talking about. Okay. So some editorials have called for limits on the amount of homework given to children. They point out that free time activities play an important role in children development and that large amounts of homework reduce children's free time. Okay. So this is the reasoning. So this is the claim. I mean, they are calling for limits on the amount of homework, and this is their reasoning because it limits free time. It reduces free time for children. But the average homework time for a 10-year-old, for example, is little more than 30 minutes per night. So this is again a fact given by the educational theorist that actually the time taken, time required for children is over 30 minutes for that assignment. Clearly, therefore, there is no need to impose the limits these editorials are calling for. So the theorist is saying it's around 30 minutes, the time required for homework. And 30 minutes is not big enough. Therefore, there is no need for such limits. So the final claim made by the theorist is that there is no need for limits on amount of homework that we're giving, because I mean the reasoning is that the assignment require little over 30 minutes per night. Okay, average homework time. So average homework time is over 30 minutes. This is the reasoning given by the theorist to make the claim that no need for any limit on these homework, time of homework required. Let's try to see a pattern. Wherever average time is given, average homework time is given here as 30 minutes. If I say average of 10 items is, let's say, 5. Okay. Average, there are 10 items in a list. Average of all those 10 things is 5. Can we say no number, or let's say all numbers would be close to 9? All numbers in the list will be close to 9, close to 5. Can we say that? Anyone? Can we say that if average of 10 items is 5, can we say all the items in that list of 10 items is close to 5? It will not vary much. Can we say that? No, we cannot say. So when average is given, we cannot comment upon individual numbers. So if some numbers are very large, let's say 10, 15, okay, and some numbers can be very low. If some numbers are very large, we cannot make any conclusion based upon that number, that average number. Does that make a sense, first of all? Does that make any sense? I mean, I'm saying, does it make sense? Actually, that's what I'm asking. Individual numbers can vary a lot. So our whole argument here is that average time is 30 minutes. This is the reasoning. And on that basis, we are making a conclusion. So I mean, what if some of the numbers in that list is much more than 30 minutes? Maybe 2 hours, 50 minutes, 100 minutes, say 200 minutes. It's possible that some of the numbers are much more than that. And there would, in that case, be a need to put some limit because some numbers are very large, can be very large. Okay. So when you see option D, in most schools, I mean, the assumption is if most schools, if not all, the homework assignments given are of a length that does not diverge widely from the average. Because if they diverge widely from the average, if they diverge a lot from 30 minutes, that means it's a possibility that some of the numbers are very high. And in that case, there would be a limit, there would be a need to put limits on those homework time. Does that make sense? Guys? Anybody who picked other than D? Shweta, you picked A.
Yeah,
Again, we'll come to A, but
confusion between A and D.
Acha, but D makes sense now,
Yes,
much
yes.
more sense.
Yes.
This is the reason. I mean, this logic can be used in many questions. There will be one more question that will use similar logic. Okay. Any other? I mean, anybody picked any other option? If okay, now let's see other options. The free time activities that 10-year-olds engage in are most are all approximately equally effective. See, the reason we are saying the reason of making the conclusion that there is no need for limits is based on the reason is the average amount of homework, average time required for homework. It's not about whether it fosters development or not. Shweta, makes sense now why A is irrelevant?
Yes, yes.
Okay, it has to hit the reasoning, na? On what basis we are making the conclusion? It has to hit that basis. Okay, and this is not the reason. We are not disputing whether free time activities are relevant. I mean, they are effective or not. We are saying they're effective, but the reason we are making this conclusion is that whether that is hindering that free time or not. It's all about that. So it doesn't hit that point. Regularly doing homework assignments improve children's academic performance. Now, it doesn't tell me whether there is a need for limit or not. It's again irrelevant. Okay. Again, the point is whether the homework time required is low or high. That's the argument. It doesn't hit that. Individual teachers are not just best judges of how much homework to assign. I mean, again, irrelevant. We are talking about time that homework assignment will need. We are not talking about anything else. Okay. The point of argument is how much time is required to do the homework assignment. That's it. D definitely hits that. Let's see option E. Free time activities rarely teach children skills, or again, it doesn't hit the time required for assignment. That is the point of contention, and it doesn't hit that. Understood, everyone? Any doubts? Any questions? Okay, now let's see eighth. Again, eighth is very good. Goatland has long been narrowly self-sufficient in both grain and meat. Okay, narrowly self-sufficient. That means it's almost just self-sufficient. It doesn't have surplus. It's just self-sufficient. However, as per capita income in Goatland has risen toward the world average. So per capita income is increasing. Per capita consumption of meat has also risen towards the world average. Okay, so per capita income is increasing. So per capita consumption of meat is also going up. Is also rising. Therefore, since per capita income continues to rise, so this will keep happening. Whereas domestic grain production will not increase. So grain production will remain, let's say, same. It will not increase. So Goatland will soon, and one more thing, it takes several pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of meat. So, several pound of grains are required to produce some meat, 1 pound of meat. Therefore, Goatland will have to import either grain or meat or both. Okay, so it's like meat consumption is increasing, but grain production is not increasing, is flat. And grain is required to produce meat. Therefore, either we'll have to get grain or meat from outside. We'll have to import. That is the conclusion. Okay, everybody understood the argument, first of all? So what is the assumption? The total acreage devoted to grain production in Goatland will not decrease substantially. See, the only outcome, only consequence of this option can be that grain production, I mean, the only consequence it can have is about grain production. Option A. Okay. And we already have that information that grain production is static. It's not increasing. It's almost same. Okay. So whatever consequence of option A was there, it's already mentioned in the paragraph in the argument. That's why we don't need that information. It's not going to do anything. Understood, everyone? Anybody picked A option for this? No? Okay, great. So A option doesn't have any consequence because whatever consequence it could have, that is already captured in the argument. Okay. Population of goatland has remained relatively constant during the country's years of growing prosperity. Again, we have nothing to do with population. We are saying per capita consumption is of meat is going up. Okay. So again, this is out. This has no consequence to the argument. Option C. Per capita consumption of meat in goatland is roughly the same across income levels. Again, doesn't really matter. Per capita consumption of meat is going up. That's all that matters. That means overall consumption is increasing. Whether it is same across all income levels or not, that really doesn't matter. How does it make any difference at all? No. Okay. In goatland, neither meat nor grain is subject to government price controls. Again, price control doesn't matter. We are not talking about price. We are talking about availability and consumption, supply and demand. That's all we're talking. People in goatland who increase their consumption of meat will not radically decrease their consumption of grain. So the point is, meat consumption is growing up and grain production is flat. Okay, we can't increase grain production. So we'll have to have more meat. So either we'll have to import meat or import grain, and from grain we'll make more meat. That's the argument. Okay. More meat is required. Either we import meat directly or we import grain and then make meat out of it. Out of it means, we'll feed it to, let's say, chicken or mutton, cattle, those kind of things. And then that's how more meat will be produced. Okay. So either of the two would be required. Option E says that people who increase consumption of meat. So people who are eating more meat, because consumption of meat is increasing. If they reduce their grain consumption, then that grain consumption, that surplus grain can be used to make more meat. So assumption is that this surplus grain will not be available. There is no surplus grain. Whatever grain is used, no part of that grain would be used otherwise to make meat. That is the assumption required. Okay, that's why we're saying we'll have to import. Because if grain is free, more grain is available without importing, we can use that grain to make more meat. That's the whole argument. Understood, everyone? That's why E is the required assumption. Okay, any doubt, any questions? I think all of you picked E for this. Yeah. Right. Okay, let me know if there is any doubt. Okay, ninth, again, a good question. And this question, let me tell you, same argument, exactly same argument has been used in many different questions. Different as in sometimes assumption, sometimes evaluation, sometimes strengthening, weakening, in a lot of different arguments. Okay, so you might see the same argument in many different cases. Right now, this argument is used for assumption question. Let's see. A comparison of the two spinning mills that produced woolen yarn, the Castello mill and the Moorhead mill. So mill C and mill M showed that yarn from Castello mill had fewer flaws and greater strength. So yarn of C, yarn produced in C is better. Okay, better in terms of having fewer flaws and greater strength. Since the Castello mill's process differs from the Moorhead's mills only in the way that raw wool is treated before spinning, the treatment that Castello mill uses must be responsible for superiority. So the process of C and M, it's different only in terms of how the raw wool is treated. So this is the only difference in the process. This must be the reason, this must be the cause of better wool, better yarn in the Castello mill. Understood? That's a very simple argument in that sense. Okay, in terms of process, there is only one difference. That difference must be the cause of better quality. That's the argument. Again, when we say something is the cause of some outcome, inherent assumption is there is no other cause. That is the inherent assumption. Understood, everyone? It was also the same logic or similar logic in case of the tax rate was reduced, but the tax collection remained same. So X must be the cause. So the inherent assumption is the other cause is not there. There is no other cause. That's the inherent assumption. Here also, that's the inherent assumption. And if you see, let's see each and every option and let's see if the other cause is mentioned somewhere. Moorhead Mill's raw wool is at least as well suited as the Castello Mills, as it's for producing yarn or the quality that the Castello Mill. This is the assumption which says it's as suited. I mean, the yarn, the raw wool is as suited for as the Castello Mills as it is for other mill. Okay, it says the other possible cause is not present. Okay, so if the raw wool is more suited for Castello mill, then it can have better quality without having any other difference. The outcome can be better. That's the argument. Okay, if it is more suited for Castello mills, then that could be the cause of better quality of yarn. Okay. A option definitely says that the other possible reason is not present. That's what it says. Understood, everyone? We'll go to other options as well, but this is what it is. Anybody who picked other answer? Mansi, you picked B.
Yes, sir, understood.
Understood. Let's see other options as well. Strength and freedom from flaws are not the only two properties that can be used in judging. See, the question is not about whether the quality actually is better or not. We are saying if based on these, if we judge quality, what is the cause of that better quality? Argument is not whether the quality is better or not actually. Getting the point, Mansi?
Yes, sir.
That's irrelevant to the discussion. We are not talking about whether the quality actually is good or not. What we're saying is, assuming the quality is good, what is the cause of that good quality? The Moorhead Mills yarn is intended for the same market. Again, we are not talking about what is the purpose of that. We're talking about quality is better. What is the cause of the quality? The treatment that Castello Mill gives to the raw wool before spinning is no more costly. Cost is not a factor out. It's not a factor. We're not talking about cost. Simply saying whether it's better quality. I mean, what's the cause of better quality? The Moorhead Mill doesn't have a significantly larger anvil. Again, we're not talking about quantity. We're talking about quality. Again, irrelevant. Understood, everyone? Any doubts, any questions out here? Let me know. Okay. 11th. Okay. Good question again. And this is not entirely different from what we have done already. Okay, it's similar to what we have done. Although parapsychology is often considered pseudoscience, it is in fact a genuine scientific enterprise because it uses scientific methods such as controlled experiments and statistical tests of clearly stated hypotheses to examine the questions of it raises. Okay, so we are saying it's a genuine scientific enterprises. Okay, because the reason given is it uses X, Y, Z, controlled experiments, statistical tests and hypothesis, those kind of things. It uses these things. That's why we are calling it as a genuine scientific enterprise. Okay, and this question can be very easy after this, just by looking at this reasoning and the conclusion. Okay, so if a field of study can conclusively answer the question it raises, then it is a genuine science. Conclusively answer the question it raises is different from using XYZ. Okay. What we are saying is it uses certain things. That's why we are calling it scientific enterprise. So it's not about, it's a different factor altogether that we are, other than XYZ. Okay. It's a new factor out. Since parapsychology uses scientific methods, it will produce credible results. Again, whether the outcome or the results are credible or not, that is not our question. Question is, if something uses this, we are calling it genuine scientific enterprise. Any enterprise that doesn't use controlled experiments and statistical tests is not genuine science. Now, see, if you compare option C and D, any field of study that employs scientific methods is a genuine scientific enterprise. Option C and D are like negated. Okay. Option C is negation of option D, in the sense, negation as in something that doesn't use XYZ, okay, is not genuine science. Okay. Option D says anything that employs XYZ, I mean scientific methods, is a genuine scientific enterprise. Which one do you pick out of the two? That's the question. Let's see what you have picked. So for 11th, we have D, we have B as well. Saurav, you picked B.
Sir, I was confused between B and D, but since D, I found it.
B is credible results. We are not talking about whether the results are credible or not.
Sir, but the question was regarding the assumption, so that's why.
See, it's again, we are saying something that uses XYZ. We are, something, just because something uses XYZ, we are calling it genuine scientific enterprise. Whether the results are credible or not, that's out of question.
Yes, sir, regarding the result, it was way out of the context.
It's out of context because of the results. That's why option B cannot be our answer. We picked B. That's why I asked.
Yes, sir.
Getting the point? Whether the results are credible or not, that's not a question that we are answering.
So actually, I was confused between B and D, but at last,
But I'm telling you the reason why B is out.
Yes, I got, sir.
Okay. We'll see D a little later. Kushal, you picked A. No, not A. That was for 9th. Okay. Any other answer? If anybody got other than C and D, let me know. Okay. We'll resolve this thing between C and D. Let's come to E option. Since parapsychology raises clearly statable questions, they can be tested in controlled experiment. It's not about whether, X can lead to Y or not. No, whether if we employ X, Y, and Z, can we call it genuine scientific enterprise or not? That's the question. Okay. Factors used are X, Y, and Z. Whether, anyone using X, Y, Z, can we call it genuine scientific enterprise? That's the question. We're not talking about X and Y, how are they related, whether X is causing Y or not. That's not the question. Okay. Now let's see between C and D. Let's try to resolve. Let's read the argument again if required. Although parapsychology is considered pseudoscience, is in fact a genuine scientific enterprise because it uses scientific methods such as so and so. 3 methods are used: controlled experiments, scientific tests, 2 actually, controlled experiments and statistical tests that of clearly stated hypothesis. Anything uses these 2 things, we are calling it as scientific enterprise. Option C says something that doesn't use controlled experiments and statistical tests is not a genuine science. Something uses both of them is a genuine scientific enterprise. Okay. So first of all, we are talking about genuine scientific enterprise. Okay. An enterprise being genuine science, a field of study being scientific enterprise. That's the first thing. We're talking about scientific enterprise. That's one thing. Second, just by saying something doesn't use X and something that doesn't use X and Y is not genuine science. Versus something that says X and Y, something that uses X and Y is a genuine scientific enterprise. science or scientific enterprise, I'm not making that distinction. We'll pick option D in that case, because just by saying something that doesn't employ X and Y is not a genuine science, doesn't lead to the conclusion that anything using X and Y would be a genuine science. Getting my point? X and Y is not using X and Y is not a science. That is fine. But I'm looking for an option which says someone or something using X and Y is a genuine science. Because this option still leaves the room open for the discussion as to whether someone or something using X and Y, can we call it genuine science or not? Because there might be other factors involved, Z, A, B, C. So maybe other factors might also be required for it to call genuine science.
Sir, it will be true in all the cases. Like
Yeah,
in
definitely.
Okay.
What we call is option C says X and Y is a necessary requirement. Okay. Option D says using X and Y, X and Y are sufficient required. Sufficient things. Are you seeing the difference between these two things? Option C says something that doesn't use X and Y, we cannot call it science. That means X and Y are necessary. But these might not be sufficient because there could be other things also required. Maybe all 5 things are required for something to be called a genuine science. Okay. D says using these 2 things is sufficient for something to call a genuine science. So we are looking for whether it is sufficient or not, because the argument says it can be called a genuine scientific enterprise because it uses X and Y. That means we are looking for them to be sufficient, not just necessary. Can you see that distinction? That's very, very important, because that can be used in many, many questions. Whether something is just necessary or something is sufficient to be called genuine scientific enterprise. Is that clear, everyone? That something just being necessary or something being sufficient, this is a very clear distinction being made in many, many questions. We'll see. Understood, everyone? Not using X and Y, we cannot call it scientific enterprise. That just makes them necessary. But that doesn't call them sufficient. What we need is some option that calls them sufficient, which is option D. Is that clear to everyone? The distinction between C and D? All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now any doubt, let me know. Now let's come to another subtopic, which is evaluation. Evaluate. Okay. Again, the question prompt would be, which option is required to evaluate the argument or the conclusion? Okay. Which option is required to evaluate the argument or the conclusion? What do you mean by evaluate the argument or the conclusion? What do you mean by that, first of all? Evaluate as in whether the argument or the conclusion is it's correct or not. It is sound conclusion, it's strong conclusion or not. Okay. That's what we are trying to evaluate. Okay. Which option is required to do that evaluation? Okay. First of all, we are looking for some new set of information. New as in different from what is already given to me. Okay, because something which is already given, that has already been taken into account while making the argument. So it cannot lead to any further evaluation. So anything that is required for evaluation has to be different from what is already given to me. That's first thing. Okay, let's take one example. And second thing, it must have the ability to impact the conclusion. that thing, this, impacting the conclusion would be there, with all CR questions. Doesn't matter which topic we're talking about. Okay. All right, let's take one example. The example that we took initially, new GMAT format has been launched. Okay, so the older books will not be or cannot be used to practice the appropriate type of questions. Okay. And again, the question is which option would be required to evaluate this conclusion or argument. I'll write two options and see whether they'll be, which one would be hitting the argument or not. Whether the number of questions in the older books is similar to that in new books. So, can we use this information to evaluate this argument or not? Anyone? It's not relevant because the argument is not about whether we can practice enough number of questions. It's about the type of question, the quality of questions. It's not about number of questions. This option cannot be used to evaluate this argument. Okay. And let's say other option, whether the type of questions asked is significantly different in the new format, compared to old format. Okay, so clearly this definitely can be used to evaluate, because whether the type of questions is significantly different or not, that will decide whether the older books can be used to practice the right type of questions or not. Okay, is that clear, everyone? See, what you need to do is, if you see, the options are mostly in the form of whether this is not, whether that is not. Okay, you take a yes or no case. Okay, whether the type of questions has changed or not, you take a yes answer and no answer. With different, extreme answers. One yes case, one no case. Can we have different conclusions or not? Okay, so in this case, if we answer yes, the questions are significantly different, the type of questions, then we say that yes, we cannot use older books. Okay, but if the answer is no, the questions are not significantly different, then this conclusion would be wrong. Then we would say that older books can be used to practice the right kind of questions. But if we say yes and no here, it will have no impact on the argument, because again, you're not talking about number of questions. Is that clear, everyone? That's the kind of, most of the options would be like that, whether this is the case or not, whether that is the case or not. Okay. So that's what we are trying to understand. Okay. Take extreme answers to the questions, extreme cases like yes and no. Okay. And see if we can have different conclusions with yes and no answers. A yes can give me a different answer, no can give me a totally different answer. That is your ultimate test. That would be the correct evaluate options. Okay, understood, everyone? Let's go to the questions and we'll have a better Okay. Try first question. Give it a try, the first question. 16th, it is illegal to advertise. Let's see. It's illegal to advertise prescription medications in headland except directly to physicians, either by mail or in medical journals. A proposed law would allow general advertising of prescription medications. Opponents object that general population lacks the specialized knowledge to evaluate such advertisements and might ask their physicians for inappropriate medications. But since physicians have the final say as to whether to prescribe a medication for a patient, inappropriate prescription would not become more common. So, final conclusion is inappropriate prescription would not become common. And the reason is physicians have the final say. Okay, so who has the final say? All other factors are mentioned, right? They might lack specialized knowledge in a general public, and they might evaluate it differently. They might ask physicians for inappropriate medications. But ultimately, the conclusion would be arrived at by, the main factor we need to see is who has the final say. Okay, so all the options would be hitting that thing or should be hitting. The correct option should be hitting this. So which would be most useful to evaluate? Whether advertising for prescription medications might alert patients to the existence of effective treatments for minor ailments that they previously thought to be untreatable. Can you guys hear me? I think I lost connection in between.
Yes,
Audible?
sir.
Sir, you are audible.
Okay. So again, who has the final say? That will decide everything. Okay? That's something that we need to see. First option says whether advertising for prescription medications will alert patients to existence of effective treatments. See, what could be the consequence of this information? The only consequence it can have is whether patients will go to the doctors more frequently as in for those ailments for which they were not going earlier. Okay. It doesn't tell me who has the final say. It doesn't affect that thing. It doesn't tell me that thing. So earlier for XYZ ailments, they were not going. The only thing that can happen is they'll start going for those ailments to the doctors. But again, who has the final say? It doesn't touch upon that thing. So that's why this option is out. Okay. So, if we say yes and no answer to this, yes, it will alert patients and they might go to doctors. No would say it'll not alert patients and they'll stop. They'll not start going to the doctors. It has no impact on who has the final say. That's why this is out. Second, whether some people might go to the physician for no reason other than ask for a particular medication that they have seen advertised. Now, it says they might go to the physician to ask for certain medication. Again, does it tell me who has the final say? Does it say that the doctor will have to prescribe whatever the patient is asking? No, it doesn't hit that. Okay. Whether the proposed law requires prescription medication advertisements directed to the general public to provide the same information. Now, whether it's same information or different information. Okay, if we take two cases, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't address who has the final say. Whosoever has the final say will prevail. That's the point. So if it is same information, doesn't matter. If it is different information, doesn't matter. It's ultimately the doctor, or whosoever is prescribing it, that doesn't change. So this option is also out. Whether advertisements for prescription medications are currently an important source of information. Again, whether it's important or not important, yes or no, it doesn't tell me who has the final say. Doesn't really matter. Whether physicians would give in to the patient's demand of prescription medication chosen by patient when the originally described by the physicians fails to perform. Now, if we have a yes or no case to this answer, yes means physician will give in to the patient's demand. That means patient has the final say. No means the physicians will not give in. That means the doctor physicians has the final say. That makes a difference. That decides who has the final say. And it changes as to who has the final say. It can have different outcomes in that context, in that regard only. No other option has or touches upon this thing. No other option. Does that make sense, everyone? Any doubts? Any questions? E is the correct answer because it decides whether the conclusion can be different or not. Okay, let's do 17th. 17th would be the most difficult question that we'll be doing today. 18th also. and 22. Okay. 17th, 18th, and 22. And 23 as well. We do this one. 17, 18, 22, and 23. Yeah. Try these 4 questions. Okay, let's see the questions. The Nile Delta of Egypt was invaded and ruled from 1650 to 1550 BC by the people called Hyksos. Their origin is uncertain, but archaeologists hypothesize that they were Canaanites. Okay, so where we have a lot of names and those kind of things, you better write them. So Hyksos people were, they hypothesized that they were Canaanites. Canaanite means they were from Canaan, the name of the city. In support of this hypothesis, the archaeologists point out that excavation of Avaris, the Hyksos capital. So when excavation of Hyksos was done, I mean that excavation have uncovered large numbers of artifacts virtually identical to artifacts produced in Ashkelon, a major city of Canaan at the time of Hyksos civilization. So out of excavation, we have got a lot of artifacts which are identical to those produced in Canaan at the time of invasion. Okay, so the main argument made is, the hypothesis is that these Hyksos people were Canaanites. They came from Canaan. And on what basis we are saying that? What is the basis of saying that they were from Canaan? That, when we excavated Hyksos, a lot of artifacts were found, and a lot of those artifacts were identical to those produced in Canaan at the time of invasion. So at the time when the invasion happened, some artifacts were produced in Canaan, and very identical artifacts were excavated in Hyksos. Okay, so the argument actually is the inherent argument that Hyksos people must have brought those artifacts from Canaan. Okay, so that's what we are. Hyksos people must have brought those artifacts from Canaan. That's what we are primarily basing our argument upon, the hypothesis. Okay, is that understood? First of all, understanding the argument would be a little challenging here. It's a little complex. Okay, so the artifacts were similar. So we are simply assuming that Hyksos must have brought those artifacts from Canaan, and that's why we are calling that Hyksos people came from Canaan. That's what we're doing. So in order to evaluate the force of archaeologists' evidence, this is important. Force means whether that evidence means artifacts being identical. Okay, so we're not challenging whether the artifacts are identical or not. That's not what we're doing. Whether that evidence, having those identical artifacts, that as an evidence, is it a strong evidence or not? Force of evidence means whether that evidence is strong to make the conclusion or not, the hypothesis or not. That's what we are discussing. Let's see. Whether there were some artifacts found at Avaris that were unlike those produced in Ashkelon, but that date to before 1700 BC. See, it says whether some of the artifacts were different. Okay. See, in the argument, we are not saying that we are saying large number of artifacts were identical. We're not saying all of them were identical. That's not the point of argument. Okay, that's not the reasoning used. That's not the part of the evidence that we are using. Okay, our argument is not based whether all of them were identical or some of them were identical. No, that's why this option is out. Okay, it will not decide anything for that matter. Right? Everybody agrees with me on this? It's not about whether all of them were there or some of them were there, because the argument itself says, a lot of artifacts were similar, and the argument, the hypothesis is based on that only. We are not saying all of them were identical. Okay, if some of them were not identical, that's totally fine. It doesn't make any difference. That's the point. Whether the Hyksos ruled any other part of Egypt besides Nile Delta. So again, whether they ruled other parts or not, that's not our argument. Argument is they came from Canaan because they could have brought those artifacts to Hyksos from Canaan. Okay? Whether they ruled other parts or not, that's immaterial. They might have ruled 10 other parts, doesn't make any difference. Question is where they came from. They came from Canaan or not. Okay, based on the evidence. So it doesn't check anything about the evidence getting used. The evidence that we are using, artifacts, it doesn't change any factor of those any strength or weakness of that evidence. Okay, understood everyone? Option B is out. Third, whether Avaris was the nearest Hyksos city. Again, whether it was nearest or not, that's not, the distance doesn't matter. The distance doesn't tell me anything about the evidence getting used. Okay, artifacts were identical, whether they were close by or whether they were far away from that really doesn't make any difference. Out, whether Ashkelon after 1550 BC continued to produce artifacts similar to those found at Avaris. Again, whether they continued after that or not, that's not a point. The evidence is, those artifacts were produced in Canaan at the time of invasion. Whether they continued or discontinued really doesn't make any difference. Okay. Whether many of the artifacts found at Avaris that are similar to artifacts produced in Ashkelon date to well before Hyksos invasion. Now this tells me we found the artifacts, they were identical. We are not challenging that. They were identical artifacts, fine, no problem. But whether that evidence can be used to make any conclusion or not, that's what we are checking. It says, it opens up the possibility. I mean, if those artifacts that are identical, if they were already present before the invasion. So if they were available before the invasion, well before the invasion, that means they were already present when Hyksos came. When Hyksos people came from Canaan. So already present means it's possible that Hyksos might not have brought them. Okay, but if they were not present before the invasion, that means it's more possible that Hyksos people have brought them. Getting my point, everyone? If they're already present, then we can't say that Hyksos brought them because they're already there. Someone other than that might have brought them. Hyksos might have come from some other place. But if they were not present, it's more likely that Hyksos people would have brought them from Canaan. So it does check the strength of the evidence. Okay. If you see, we are not countering the evidence here. We are saying, can the evidence be used to make any conclusion or not? That's all we are saying. Okay. So artifacts are similar. Okay. But were they already present? If they were already present, that means maybe Hyksos have not brought them, someone else have brought them. Okay. And maybe then Hyksos have come from some other place, not from Canaan. Understood, everyone? Any doubts? Any question? I think all the answers that I have is E. Okay. Any doubt whatsoever with this? Let me know. Okay, let's see 18th. Many scientific disciplines, scientists generally do not do highly creative work beyond the age of 40. A tendency that has normally been taken to show that aging carries with it a loss of creative capacity. Okay, so they don't do highly creative work after 40. So age is one factor. However, by the age of 40, most scientists have been working in their chosen field for at least 15 years. So an alternative explanation is that spending too long in a single field reduces the opportunity for creative thought. So alternative explanation means we have second explanation, which says it's not the age, it's spending too long in a single field that is causing the lack of creativity. Getting a point? So there are two theories. One is age is a problem. So beyond 40, they're not doing any creative work. So it could be because of age. Another second explanation is it's not the age, it's working long in a single field. Okay. So that's the case. These are two theories, two explanations. Investigating which of the following would be most useful in choosing between the competing explanations. So two explanations are there. We want to pick one explanation. Which option will help me in picking one over another? Any one explanation over another explanation. Okay. I mean, the correct option must be supporting one of the explanations and weakening another explanation. That's the whole point. Okay, it must be going in support of one explanation, the correct option, and against the other explanation. That will help me to pick one option over one explanation over another. Okay. Whether among those scientists who do highly creative work beyond age 40. Now we're talking about those scientists who are still doing creative work after 40 age. A large proportion entered their field at a considerably later age than is common. Okay, that means there are some scientists who worked after 40. If we see those scientists, do we have a large percentage of those entering the field at a later age? That means they were comparatively new to that field, new to that particular field. That means, I mean, people who are doing the creative work after 40, if they, if most of them entered the field at a later stage, that means if most of them were new to that field, that means it's being new or old to that field that is creating lack or more of creativity. Getting my point, everyone? Then it would prove that it's not the age, it's entering a field at a later stage or at a earlier stage that decides whether creativity is there or not. It will definitely help me pick the second option, second explanation over the first one. Okay, if that is the case, if yes is the answer to this question, it will help me know that it's not age, it's being there in a field, being new or old to that field, that will decide the lack of creativity. If the answer is no, then it will say that being late or new to a field doesn't matter. That's what we'll decide. Okay, so A option we can definitely keep. I think most of you picked E. Saurav, you picked A. Saurav, did you use this logic that I've just used?
Yes, sir, the same also.
Okay. Utkarsh, Shweta, you picked E, but did you understand A at that point? What exactly it means? We'll come to E later, but is A clear now? What exactly it says? Utkarsh, Shweta?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. See, the point is the correct option should help me pick one explanation over other. Okay, it should support one explanation. It should be against other explanation. That's what. Let's see. With the scientist's choice of research projects. Now it brings in third explanation, third factor. We were dealing with factor 1 and factor 2. I want to pick one over another. Okay. B brings another factor. I'm not concerned with other factor. I want to choose between 1 and 2 only. I'm not concerned whether third factor is involved or not. Choice of research projects, that will not help me pick one over other. Okay, because it's irrelevant to both of them. Okay, so that is irrelevant. C, whether scientists who are older than 40 tend to find more satisfaction in other activities such as teaching. Again, it talks about other activities. Okay, then they do in pursuing their own research. It doesn't talk about, first of all, whether they are new to the field, their own research field or not. It doesn't help me pick one over another. Okay, it's like they are involved in other activities after 40. And again, this is not touching upon the second explanation, whether they are new to the field or old to that field or not. Out. Whether funding agencies are more inclined to award research grants to scientists who are veterans in their field. Again, we are not talking about grants available, how many funds we have, not grants, how many funds we have available. It again pulls out third factor, some new factor. I'm not concerned with that. Okay. Whether there is significant variation among scientific fields in the average age at which scientists working in those fields are at their most productive. Again, we are talking about some new factor, which is variation among fields. I mean, in one field, we might have more creativity, in another field, we might have less creativity. We're not talking about type of scientific field. We are not talking about one particular genre of the field. That's also out. Okay, understood, Utkarsh and Shweta? Option E is also irrelevant because we are talking about some third factor, which is variation among the fields. Okay, in one field, people are more creative, in another field, people are less creative. It takes away both the explanations. It doesn't help me choose one over another. Understood?
So E is like ambiguous statement. Like
Which one?
If the E option.
E option, not
variation
ambiguous.
amongst-
It talks about a different factor other than first and second explanation. For example, option B was also something which is a third factor, a different factor than first and second explanation. Right, Utkarsh?
Yes.
We're not, see, option E says that in one field they might be more creative, in another field they might be less creative. So it's not touching upon any of the two explanations offered. I want to at least support one of the explanations, if not the other one. Okay? So that's why option E is out. A is the only option we can pick. Okay, let's see 22. In late 94, the present government in the Republic of Balam came into power. Each year since then, about 30 journalists have been imprisoned for printing articles that criticize the government. Okay, so after 94, we are imprisoned. We are sending almost 30. Every year we are sending 30 journalists to prison. In 94, under the old government, so before, in the previous government, only 6 journalists were imprisoned for criticizing the government. So the old government was more tolerant of the criticism by the press than the new one is. Okay. So earlier, only 6 were sent to prison. In the new government, every year we are sending 30 journalists to the prison. So the older one was more tolerant of the criticism by the press. That's our argument. Okay. Politician says, but in 94, only 6 journalists criticized the government, and now journalists routinely do. Okay. So politician is saying, in the year when only, when 6 were sent to prison, only 6 criticized. Okay. That means all those who criticized were sent to prison. Okay. And now journalists routinely do. That means right now, not all are sent to prison. So politician is countering the argument of the journalist by putting new information. Okay, it's giving me some information that is not there in the argument made by the journalist. Okay, everybody agrees with me on the understanding of the argument, first of all. So in some of the questions you can have, 2 people making different arguments. Okay, we need to see in what sense it is different. One argument is different from the other one. That's what we need to pick. Okay, what is he doing? What is he presenting that is making the argument different? Politician is presenting new information to counter the argument. Okay, and the new information is that all who criticize were sent earlier, but right now all of them are not sent to prison. So the politician challenges the journalist argument by doing which of the following? Okay, presenting new information. That's how he's challenging the argument of the journalist. That's it. presenting data that extend further into the past than the journalist data. Is the politician talking further into the past, I mean, of the previous years than what the journalist is saying? No. We are talking about same time zones. Okay. In 94, now, and every year since then. So it's the politician is not going well before 94. No, that's not what the politician is doing. What answers we picked for this? Let's see. B, A. Saurabh, you picked A. A is wrong. Right? Hello, Saurabh, can you hear me? I think you just joined.
Yes, sir. Now
You picked A. So A is wrong.
Yes, sir. I just.
Ah.
Yes, sir.
Introducing evidence that undermines the assumption of the journalist argument. Okay. So introducing evidence, are we introducing new information? Yes. Does it undermine the assumption? Let's see. First part definitely is correct. Introducing new evidence. Let's keep this option and we'll evaluate it later. Maybe the remaining options will be irrelevant and we'll simply pick this option. That's it. Questioning the accuracy of the evidence presented. The politician is not questioning. The politician is not saying that the evidence put forth is wrong. No, he's putting new evidence. He's not saying that these numbers quoted are wrong. The number quoted are not wrong. Okay. The politician is not saying that the numbers that you quoted are wrong. No, he's picking new information. D, pointing out that the argument illegitimately draws a general conclusion on the basis of a sample of only a few. Are we saying that is the politician saying that the sample is too small? Sample taken by the journalist is too small? No. The politician is not saying that you took a small part of the thing and you extrapolated it, you generalized that based on that. No. He's taking, I mean, the journalist is taking the entire sample, and again, the politician is not saying that your sample is too small. No. I mean, he would be saying it explicitly if that is the case. That's not the case. Out. E, stating that the argument treats information about some members of a group as if it applied to all members of that group. Okay. Again, it's similar to option D. Does the politician say that you are talking about some members of the group? And again, you are extrapolating based on that? No. It's presenting new evidence. Okay. And undermines an assumption. Assumption was that journalists didn't take into account that how many criticized and how many were imprisoned. So it simply compares 6 versus 30 without seeing whether or how many criticized the government. So that assumption that all those who were criticized were imprisoned, that assumption was challenged. That's why option B is correct. Okay. And again, the politician is introducing new evidence, new information that is captured only in option B. That's why option B is correct. Understood, everyone? Any doubts here? Okay. 23. Okay. Normally, the pineal gland governs a person's sleep-wake cycle by secreting melatonin in response to the daily cycle of light and darkness as detected by the eye. Okay. So the eye detects light and dark, and melatonin is released. Okay. And based on that, the pineal gland governs the sleep and wake cycle. Okay. So eye detects light and darkness, and based on that, melatonin is released, and through that, pineal gland governs the sleep and wake cycle of the body. Okay, that's what is given. I mean, pineal gland governs the sleep-wake cycle by releasing melatonin, by secreting melatonin. That's how it governs. That's okay. By secreting, I mean, that's how it governs. That's what it says. Nonetheless, many people who are totally blind due to lesions in the visual cortex of brain easily maintain 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. So still, people who are blind, that means their eyes cannot detect darkness and light. They are also able to maintain 24-hour. They can also maintain that cycle, that same cycle. Okay. So the neural pathway by which the pineal gland receives information from the eye probably does not pass through the visual cortex. That means, their visual cortex is damaged or it has problems. So, despite having damage to the visual cortex, despite their visual cortex not working properly, blind people can also maintain that same cycle. That means whatever pathway, neural pathway, whatever path by which the glands receive information, that is not passing through the visual cortex. So again, little complex argument, but that's what it is. So final argument, final conclusion is that the path in which, through which the pineal gland receives information, that path doesn't have visual cortex in it. Okay, that path is not. I mean that is not passing through that visual cortex. That's the argument. Okay, so what would help me evaluate this information? Whether melatonin supplements help people who have difficulty maintaining a 24-hour sleep cycle to establish such a pattern. So would that help? Just give me a second. Yeah, sorry. So would this be, what answers we're getting for this? 23rd EDB. Okay. So whether melatonin supplements help people who have difficulty maintaining a 24-hour sleep cycle to establish such a pattern. So how do you read this? How do you evaluate? How do you see this option? If we give melatonin supplements to people who have difficulty maintaining a 24-hour sleep cycle, if I say this option is irrelevant because I don't know anything about those people who have difficulty maintaining a 24-hour sleep cycle. I don't know whether they can see or whether they can blind. People who can see, people who are blind, both of them can maintain that 24-hour sleep cycle. So people who have difficulty maintaining that 24-hour sleep cycle, who are those people? I don't know, so I cannot draw any information, any inference from this information. Getting my point? Maybe they have some other problem. Melatonin is not secreted, so there could be different problem having, encountering those people. Getting my point? I have no idea whether those people are blind or they can see. I have no idea. Because blind people can also maintain that cycle. People who are visually fine, they can also maintain that same cycle. So how do we read this information? This doesn't give me any information. Actually, it creates more confusion. Who are those people who have difficulty maintaining that cycle? Is that clear? Any doubt? Any questions? Anybody who picked A? And see, even if you didn't pick A, you must have strong reason why you are eliminating this option. The reason is this. We don't know who are those people and what do we read in that? Nothing. Let's see. Whether the melatonin levels of most totally blind people who successfully maintain a 24-hour sleep cycle change in response to changes in exposure to light and darkness. So we are talking about people who are blind, totally blind. Okay. So if we expose them to light and darkness, does their melatonin level change? Okay. If we expose them to light, if we expose them to darkness, does their melatonin level change? If answer is yes, their melatonin level change, that means they are still receiving that light and darkness. Okay, that means the visual cortex, which is damaged, despite damaged visual cortex, they're still able to see or get those light and darkness thing. That means it is getting bypassed. If the answer is no, they're not able to maintain melatonin. I mean, their melatonin level doesn't change in response to that. That means visual cortex is blocking that sensation. It does tell me whether visual cortex is part of that path or not. Getting my point, everyone? There's some people who picked E. Utkarsh, Shweta, you picked D. Understood why option B can be the correct option? Utkarsh, Shweta? We'll come to D and E option, but does this option make sense?
I have picked D only.
Acha, pick B. I think it's mentioned D. Acha, you mentioned D, by mistake maybe. Okay.
Okay.
Utkarsh, does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we'll see option E, no problem. Option C, whether melatonin is the only substance secreted by the pineal gland. I don't know. The pineal gland might be secreting other things. We are talking about maintaining or governing that 24-hour cycle by secreting melatonin. Pineal gland might have other functions and it might be secreting other stuff. Really doesn't matter. Okay. Whether most people who do not have a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle nevertheless have a cycle of consistent duration. Again, as we discussed in option 1, we don't know who are those people. Okay. And whether it is a 24-hour cycle or whether it's a cycle of some other duration, we don't know who these people are. We can't say what is happening with those people. Okay. That's why D option cannot be picked. Okay. Similar to option A, who have difficulty maintaining that cycle. We don't know who those people are. Okay. Whether there are many people with normal vision whose melatonin levels respond abnormally to periods of light and darkness. Again, they respond abnormally. It doesn't tell me whether the visual cortex is part of the path or not, because it is damaged in blind people and they're still able to respond to that. Only that tells me whether visual cortex will be in the path or not. It doesn't tell me anything. Okay, because they might have other diseases, other problems, and they're not able to maintain the melatonin levels. Okay, getting my point? B is the only answer, right? Utkarsh, can you see why option E is wrong? You're talking about people who have vision. That means visual cortex is not a problem for them. So whether it passes through this or not, it doesn't really matter. Okay, we can check that thing only with blind people, not with other kind of people. Understood? Right? See, melatonin levels are responding abnormally, but visual cortex is fine. So visual cortex is not a factor in that case. The light might be passing through that or might not be passing through that. Even if the light passes through that, still those levels are abnormal. Or even if it doesn't pass through them, it's still abnormal. Really doesn't make any difference. Okay, so a yes or no answer doesn't change anything here in option E. Okay, understood? Utkarsh?
Yes.
So again, the whole point is write the conclusion. Second, try to find patterns in assumption kind of questions. And finding those patterns will go a long way in addressing different types of questions. Okay, so that's the whole point. That's it. Thank you, guys. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.